All right, now we're looking at Chapter 3 and we're talking about federal courts. I had a lot of my lawsuits that were in federal court. Keep in mind, in the United States, we have two separate systems. You have your state court system and then you have your federal court system. So remember a while ago we were talking about you have to keep in mind the civil versus the criminal. You also have to keep in mind, are we talking about state court or federal court? The figure 3.1 on page 59 shows you graphically the routes of appeal, but it also is good to illustrate just the different premise between state court and federal court. In federal court, the first court that you would go to file your lawsuit is called district court, and there are various district courts around the state. They're located in different places, usually in the major cities. So, for example, in Missouri, there were district courts in St. Louis, Kansas City, Jefferson City. That's where the lawsuit would be filed, and you'd start there. If you lost that case and you wanted to appeal it, then it would go to the Court of Appeal. Again, we're still talking federal court. So Missouri is part of the 8th Circuit Court of Appeals, and so my lawsuits then would go to the 8th Circuit. Then finally, if you didn't like what happened in the Court of Appeals, federal court, then you have the opportunity to appeal to the Supreme Court. Now keep in mind that the Supreme Court does not have to hear every case that somebody wants to bring before it. Why? Because they have a whole lot of discretion in the cases that they decide. So usually the last decision that will be in a federal case will be the Court of Appeals. That will be the final decision. Unless the Supreme Court decides, hey, this is an important controversy or an issue that we need to decide, then they will accept it. So switching over to the other side when we're talking about state courts. State courts have different levels, more than federal courts, and it depends on the state in which you are in, what they call them. They can have different names, but essentially you would have a trial court where your case would get filed first. Then, and you have trial courts of limited jurisdiction. So, for example, if you got a speeding ticket, you would go to your municipal court and have that taken care of. Or if you have a small claims case, that would be a particular court of limited jurisdiction. But let's say you've got a big breach of contract, it's $1 million that you're talking about. That is where you'd have your trial court of general jurisdiction. Look on that chart again. Called different things, but it hears more cases, civil and criminal, at that level. Then you're going to go to the Intermediate Court of Appeals, found in most of the states are saying, and then you have the Court of Appeals. And each state court will have its own Supreme Court. Again, they call it different things, but you go through the different levels. If you got all the way to the very end of your state court lawsuit and you didn't like what happened there and you wanted to appeal it, you could appeal to the United States Supreme Court, and that's why the arrow is going over there. Again, the Supreme Court of the United States has the option in most cases whether or not it would hear that case. So that's the different routes that your case can go on. When it's talking about the jurisdiction of the courts, that's basically whether a court has power to hear the case. Think of it this way. It would make no sense at all if you had a breach of contract case and you got to pick out of the 50 states, you just said, you know, I feel like filing it in Michigan because I always wanted to visit Michigan. That would make no sense. Or you decided, you know, I want every lawsuit to be filed in Florida because I want to go to Florida for a vacation. Now that wouldn't work. So we've come up with rules for when courts have jurisdiction, and it's usually based on geography. So if you had a breach of contract, everybody was located in Florida, that's where the contract was signed, then your case is going to be filed in Florida. We have specific courts that can hear cases, for example, a bankruptcy court. We have special courts, and their jurisdiction is only bankruptcy, and that falls under, it's actually a federal court, but that federal court, all they do is hear bankruptcy cases. So that's one that's not based on geography. It's based on the subject matter, which is talked about on page 58. And I think that's all I really need to tell you about that.